Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And, of course, if you are new to the show, there are lots of ways to listen. You can, of course, follow through email updates, which a lot of people have been doing lately. Very good way to follow the show. Through RSS feeds. I'm on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play. There's a whole bunch of podcatchers out there that you can listen to the show with. Of course, everything is archived at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com. I'm also replayed on Friday nights on a host of other networks, including Awake Radio and People's Internet Radio. And on Saturdays, I am on KYAH 540 AM in Utah from 6 to 8 Mountain Time. So if you're in the area out there, please tune in. Very quickly, the bonus podcast for this month is basically ready to go. It'll be posted up tomorrow at some point, so don't worry. It'll be out there. If you want to support my work, you can always go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond, and you can become a subscriber. And hopefully, Christoph Gehrman and I will be recording a new episode of Porkins Great Games sometime in June. And very quickly, there was a new episode of Open Minds on Air, so please do check that out if you haven't already. And there'll be a couple episodes posted in early in June and then later in June. We'll have 2 new episodes, so please stay tuned for that. But anyway, today we are joined once again by a very special guest, Jon Gold, who is a 9/11 activist and researcher. Jon recently was on the show back on episode 131 with Robbie Martin, and we talked about we talked a lot about the Saudi angle to 9/11. We talked about some of the problems facing people health-wise from 9/11 here in New York, and we covered a lot of topics, but towards the end of the show, we were sort of talking about Jon's book, which is basically a transcription of all of the amazing interviews that Jon did on his podcast, We Were Lied to About 9/11. So the book is called We Were Lied to About 9/11, The Interviews, and I've got Jon on the line today to discuss the book and a whole lot more. So, Jon Gold, how are you? It's good to be talking with you.
Hi, Pierce. How are you doing? Thank you very much for having me on the show. I'm always doing the best that I can.
Excellent, excellent. And bear with me if my voice sounds a little weird today, because I was chewing Nicorette at the beginning of the interview, and I might have to pop one in later because it's been a rough couple of days quitting smoking. So if my voice sounds a little weird, that's the only reason why. But
I'm sorry, let me say something really quick. I quit smoking at the end of last year, cold turkey, and I've been chewing on the cinnamon toothpicks ever since.
I've got those right next to me as well.
So that's been helpful.
Yeah. With the tea tree oil or just the straight cinnamon?
Just straight cinnamon.
Okay. Yeah, those do work too. So does Nicorette, but you're still addicted to the nicotine. But Jon, as I was saying, you've just completed the book. It's not out and available yet to everyone out there, but you sent me an advanced copy, a PDF, and I've been going through that and also listening to a lot of the old interviews that you did on your show. And I guess before we kind of dive into some of the stuff in those interviews and in your book, tell the listeners a little bit about why you started doing the show and why you wanted to put this into a book format. Talk a little bit about that.
let me correct you on one point. The book is available now. I just released it.
Oh, excellent.
It's available at www.wewereliedtoabout911.com. No slash.
Oh, so, great. Well, we'll link up to that in the show notes for sure.
All right, excellent. So I did the book. Well, the reason I had done the show, Cindy Sheehan had her website, The Soapbox, and she wanted people to contribute to her site. And she was asking people, you know, if you have a show, would you like to share it on the site and so forth, or articles. And she asked me if I wanted to do a 9/11 show. And I thought it was a great idea. You know, I'd been doing this for so long. I'd met so many people that know so much about this, or talked to so many people that know so much about this issue over the years, that it was just a good idea. So I started doing the interviews. And one of the things that I wanted to do with the interviews is I did not want to focus on theories about 9/11. I wanted to focus on, you know, the factual information, things that happened, the story. Because once you tell the story to people, it pretty much speaks for itself. So when I say the story, I'm talking about the cover-up, the story of the cover-up, that before, you know, the time prior to 9/11, leading up to 9/11, the story itself tells the fact that we were lied to about 9/11. So I was, you know, I broke my back 5 years ago, and I've been homebound a lot. And I was speaking to Mickey Huff, who was the director of Project Censored, and he recommended that I transcribe all of the interviews that I had done and put them into a book. And I thought instantly that was a great idea, because a lot of people digest things better when they read them. Mm-hmm. That they can go back and reread something if they have to. And I thought that would be wonderful for people to have as a resource. So that's what I did. I paid someone to transcribe them for me, because I could never do that. I despise transcriptions. So I paid someone to do that for me, and it took a while. It took about a year, over a year, to transcribe all of them, and then, you know, I had to do the editing and so forth. So the interviews came about because Cindy Sheehan had asked if I wanted to do them. I said yes, and that's where it came from. So this book that was just released was actually like 4 years in the making. You know, all the work that I did to get the interviews together, all the work I did for each interview as far as research and being able to ask the right questions. You know, and so after that, then the transcriptions and everything. It's just been a 4-year process, and finally the book's been released.
Excellent. And again,
and I've released it. I'm sorry, I've released it for free.
Yes, that's what I was just going to mention. Once again, the website is wewereliedtoabout911.com, and the book is up there for free. I highly recommend people get a copy of it. And I agree with you, John. I think obviously I love radio and the podcasting format, and I think it's really conducive to, especially your shows, which some of them are quite long interviews, you know, over 2 hours, where you really get into a lot of the detail. But it's really nice to have that all in text as well. And I've actually found myself, you know, there's a few people I follow, you know, Tom Secker being one of them, who always provides transcripts of his podcast. And it's really helpful when you're doing research and you're trying to find something, because, again, it's a PDF. You can search for a particular name or a topic. You can search for lines, and you can get everything, and it's wonderful. Then you can just kind of quote from it directly. You don't have to sit there trying to find where it is in an interview. And I agree. I think sometimes reading is a better way to kind of remember information as well, and to really kind of digest it. So I think it's excellent. And John, give us a bit of an idea. If people are a little unfamiliar with the show, I mean, there's so many interesting people that you interviewed. Obviously, many of them will be familiar to a lot of people out there. You've interviewed Thomas Drake, J. Michael Springman, Nafiz Ahmed, Colleen Rowley, Mickey Huff, who you mentioned earlier. Our good friend Robbie Martin was interviewed several times. But there's also a fair amount of people, I think, which will be new to many. One that you recommended to me, Eric Larson, very interesting researcher, did a lot of really tremendous work. I think he'll be new to a lot of people. There's you've interviewed family members of victims. Bob McIlvaine, I believe is his name. Andy Worthington, who I hope is more familiar to people. So give us a little bit of a background. What was your kind of criteria for the people that you were picking for the, and maybe give us a little kind of an idea of some of the people you think that will not be so familiar that people should really kind of check out.
Well, a lot of it had to do with just, picking people that were part of the story, that were part of, like Colleen Rowley was a 9/11 whistleblower, so she was part of the story. Lori Van Auken was a Jersey girl, or is a Jersey girl, or is a 11th advocate, and she was part of the story. They fought for the creation of the 9/11 Commission. Senator Bob Graham, all these people had a part. Not all of them, but a lot of them had a part to play in the actual story. So those are the people that I tried to talk to the most. And I say that I wanted to speak to the, quote, best of the best, the researchers and so forth, people that, did not push theory as fact, essentially. A lot of people do that. A missile hit the Pentagon, for instance.
Yes.
I hate that theory, but people promote it as fact. And I did not want to talk to that type of crowd. I wanted to talk to people that a lot of people just don't know about, that they haven't heard over the years from the mainstream 9/11 truth movement for the most part. There are exceptions to every rule, but, most people know about the buildings and a missile hitting the Pentagon or something to that effect, or Flight 93 being shot down, or the idea that there were no hijackers and all these theories that have been promoted as fact over the years. I wanted to avoid all of that and just get down to the nitty gritty, a lot of things that just people do not know about.
Well, one of those I think that jumped out to me was you did a 4-part interview with Paul Thompson, who's just a fountain of knowledge. And if people don't know who Paul Thompson is, he helped to construct the 9/11 timeline for historycommons.org, which is still something I use to this day. History Commons is on my website as a site to follow. I was literally going through it just a few minutes before we went on air. And Paul Thompson is very much is really just kind of presenting, this is factually what happened. It's not about a theory necessarily. Now, he might provide his own analysis or his own ideas, but so much, what makes History Commons so great is, A, everything is actually sourced. It's not like some of these 9/11 sites where, they're either, it's, coming out of nowhere, or it's from, a rumor that was started by so-and-so on this forum. Everything is sourced on History Commons. And it really is just almost like a, day-by-day accounting of what happened. And not just 9/11, too. History Commons has a great timeline on the Oklahoma City bombing, which even at times kind of ties into some 9/11 stuff. There's a lot on the History Commons website. Anthrax as well.
There are a multitude of timelines on historycommons.org. The main one was the complete 9/11 timeline, which brought it the most coverage. But, they have a multitude of timelines on there, the lead up to the Iraq War, for instance. And when you read these things, it tells the story. It tells you, it gives you so much context to what's going on. Like every entry, you click on an entry and then it has like 5 or 10 preceding entries that lead up to that one that gives you an idea of what was happening, which the news does not do. For instance, when they cover 9/11, let's say they cover an aspect of the cover-up, like Saudi Arabia, for instance. They will not give context at all to the story. They won't say, for instance, knowing that the 9/11 Commission was corrupt and compromised, now we have this issue, something to that effect. They'll treat everything as if it was in a vacuum. So to give no context to people. And it's just a wonderful site. It was down recently for about a week and a half, and I was scared that it wasn't going to come back up, but I spoke to the owner and, pushed him to get it back up.
No, good. I mean, I don't know what I would do if it disappeared. I mean, like I said, I use it constantly. For 9/11 and also a lot of OKC, the stuff on the Oklahoma City bombing, which is probably what got me interested eventually in 9/11, is an invaluable resource. So, please do support historycommons.org, anybody listening. John, let's maybe we can kind of just sort of dive into a few different. Oh, actually, you know what? Before we kind of do that, I just wanted to also get your take on this. I mean, why put this out in book format? Is it your hope that we can kind of get people interested in this again? Because I mean, I hate saying it, but the push to uncover what was going on seems to have kind of faded. Almost nobody in the so-called alternative media, or all whatever, really talks about 9/11 anymore. I mean, it's a real shame that it's kind of disappeared. And
I'm sorry.
No, jump right in.
A lot of the debunkers used to say that the 9/11 truth movement was quote unquote dead. I saw some media reports suggesting that a while ago, and a lot of those alternative journalists that do not cover the issue, no matter what comes up, they don't want to lose their pulpits, and they just refuse to touch it. As far as I know, Glenn Greenwald, Amy Goodman, just so many of them will not touch it to the degree that they should. And I asked in the book specifically, in the introduction, I said, quote, to those journalists who consider themselves alternative press, but don't incorporate the fact that we were lied to about 9/11 or don't know the truth about 9/11 into whatever post-9/11 related story they report about, I have this to say. You are helping to create an extremely dangerous environment. History is being written, and it's simply the wrong history. Please reconsider your stance on the issue of 9/11. Thank you. I can't get them to cover it. I've tried for years. So as far as, the death or quote unquote of the 9/11 truth movement, it's not true. There are still many people that are active, whether they're talking about theories or not. There are still people that are active, and there are family members that are active. Like we spoke last time, the court trial or the courts that are going on. So it's still an active cause. It's just not getting news coverage, number one. I mean, for instance, I forget, there was something that came out from the court decision from the trial that's going on, and it was
the one in New York, right?
Yeah, it was covered by like one news outlet. And so nobody knows about it unless they see it from someone else or they're looking for it. So it's very hard to keep up with.
Well, you know what I was also referring to? It used to almost be sort of like a given that if you were covering alternative topics, alternative history, if you were into conspiracy theory, you had to talk about 9/11 at some point. And I find it hilarious that, and also quite upsetting, that you have a lot of these, mostly right-wing internet pundits that are popping up everywhere talking about the deep state, that's after Donald Trump, when they will just simply ignore 9/11, which is if you want to. And I almost hate using the term deep state because it's sort of lost any meaning. But, if you want to understand the complexities of the deep state and also to understand how nebulous it is, and how it is almost, you cannot really define it. You know, like that's my major problem with the way that term has been bandied about now, is that it is this is what it represents. I mean, if you really want to understand how difficult it is to comprehend it, I think you look no further than 9/11, where you've got so many different competing narratives and events and people and places. I mean, there's so many different angles and aspects that I think that's also what it makes it so difficult to comprehend. It's what makes it so difficult to kind of bring it up to people who are maybe not as knowledgeable about it. Well, because once you start talking about it, it's like, whoa, slow down, you know?
Well, that's why I've always said, and I've always tried to keep it simple. You know, we were told there were no warnings, for instance. There were a multitude of warnings, and that's easy to show. You know, the 9/11 Commission, I've said a million times, has been sold to the world as the, quote, definitive account of 9/11, and there are many things to show that that's a lie, that's false. You know, there were NORAD lied, and that's so easy to show, and it you know, just keep it simple. Just ask people. I used to ask people, do you think we were lied to about 9/11? Just out of the blue, you know. I know what my answer was, but I was just curious to see what their answer would be. And a lot of times people just say, yes. Oh, of course we were lied to, but they don't understand, you know, like you said, what the lies are exactly. And so, like I said, keep it simple. And I said earlier, tell the story. You know, prior in the 90s, you know, we did this, that, and the other thing with supporting terrorists or mujahideen or whatever you want to call them in, you know, places like the Balkans and the Caucasus, all the way leading up to 9/11. We worked with Saudi Arabia in bringing Bosnian Muslims. It's on History Commons into I think Yugoslavia.
Sure.
So we were using terrorists for years, and a lot of our allies used terrorism as a political means to an end. And, you know, you just tell the story. You get up to the Bush administration. They came into office wanting to go to war. They came into office wanting to expand executive power, which is something Dick Cheney wanted to do since the 70s. They came into office wanting to make billions for their corporate friends, which is no surprise to anyone. You know, these days, we know that now. And then you just go through the history. Like, for instance, as I mentioned before last time I was here in March of 2001, prior to 9/11, Bush and Bandar were talking about the need for decisive military action in Iraq because the no-fly zone wasn't working, you know, according to the book that it came from. You know, Cheney was put in charge of, you know, quote-unquote terrorism, I guess, and I think it was May 5th, 2001. And this is all on the timeline.
Sure.
And, you know, there were people, according to Richard Clarke, who were talking about creating a casus belli prior to 9/11 to be able to go to war. You know, that the casus belli is exactly, you know, what 9/11 seems to be in a lot of ways. A means to go to war that they wanted, that they may have been instrumental in making. I have said over the years that I don't look at 9/11 as an act of war. I look at it as a crime. And as with every crime, there are suspects for that crime. And elements within our government and other governments have more than earned the title of suspect for the crime of 9/11. And so when you look at it that way, you know, when Bush and Cheney went to Tom Daschle in January of 2002 and asked him, you know, according to CNN, they said, quote, limit the scope, end quote, of the congressional inquiry, limiting it to just the intelligence agencies. And Tom Daschle said that they asked him specifically not to investigate the attacks at all. And then as I said, we were told that there were no warnings. And then in May of 2002, the August 6th presidential daily briefing was leaked, which showed that there was a warning. So, you just tell the story. And it's so easy to back up these not claims. They're not claims, that they're reported. They're fact. They're written about in books. I don't know. Truth is a funny word. Just look at yesterday, for instance. There was pictures of children in cages from 2014 at the Border Patrol who were unaccompanied by adults who were put into cages that were trying to cross the border. And people promoted these photos as if it was taking place today. Like, remember the recent story of the missing children? Mm-hmm. Well, people were saying, well, this is where the children are. But that picture was from 2014, or those pictures were from 2014, which doesn't make it any less horrible, especially still going on. And, so that story was getting promoted everywhere as if it was fact, as if it was truth, and it wasn't. So you have to be very careful with what you call truth.
Oh, yeah, well, especially, unfortunately, with the type of media personalities that exist today that are really kind of pushing. They're lying to your face, and many people that support them even know that they're lies, but they don't really care because it fits into their very narrow worldview.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Go, jump in, John.
Well, our press, at the time of 9/11 was horrible. Now it's just unthinkably horrible.
Yeah.
Yesterday was Memorial Day, and I support the soldiers. I care about them deeply. I want all of them brought home immediately, and I don't want any more to die or to kill. But you see the propaganda yesterday, and it boggles the mind. We're indoctrinated from the day we're born to believe that America is the greatest country in the world, that our military only fights to defend our freedom and democracy, and also to promote it around the world. And these are just not true. But again, we're indoctrinated from birth to believe these things. And then, recruiters show up at high schools and get people to join by telling them they can travel, that they can learn a trade, that they can do, all kinds of things. And so kids do. And it's sad. It breaks my heart. To me, the military should be used for defensive purposes only. If Canada or Mexico or whoever wanted to invade this country, that's what the military would be used for. They should not be used for offensive purposes. And I would not have a problem with the military if it was like that, and also if they were told the full truth about why they are doing what they're doing, so they can, if they choose to, they can believe in it and want to do it, kind of. But anyway, the press is just horrid today.
Oh yeah, it's a joke. It's absolutely a joke, and I think there's a direct correlation between the mainstream media being absolutely horrible, and then the so-called alternative media basically just taking that as a green light to produce absolute garbage and trash. And they've just sort of taken their cue from the partisan mainstream media, and they've sort of taken it to a whole other level. But there were a few things, John, that, the last time we talked, of course, immediately after we finished recording, I was on History Commons and a bunch of other places, and I was listening to your old interviews, and as I said, I was listening to a lot of the old ones and reading, in preparation for this. And there's just a whole bunch of different little aspects and topics that I wanted to kind of throw at you, and we can, discuss. And I think we'll just kind of jump into some of them. And a big one for me, I've always been particularly fascinated with what was with the actual hijackers themselves. I know a lot has been made about the the day of. What was the government up to? NORAD, the FAA. We have, there's a lot of funky stuff going on with that. And there's also, the predominant theory is always, or one that has sort of taken over, is that, there were no hijackers, or, all of the planes were remote controlled. And I'm not saying that that's not possible. I think it certainly is plausible that could have happened. But I've always been a bit more of the mindset that they're really, that these hijackers really were doing what was claimed. Now, how they got there is a whole other story. I mean, I would like to get to that with you later, but in kind of looking into that, I think then what was going on in Florida and also what was going on in San Diego is really important in understanding how we got to 9/11. And a lot of this, I think, some of the stuff in Florida with Muhammad Atta has been looked into. Daniel Hopsicker's done some work on that. Others have as well. I think we'll just sort of put Florida aside for a minute and instead look at some of the stuff in San Diego, because this is also very relevant to to some of the Saudi angle, and also some of the stuff that was revealed in some of the 28 pages. And there's a whole kind of unexplored timeline as to what was going on in San Diego before and then during the preparation for 9/11. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that, John. I mean, for instance, we've got Khalid al-Mihdhar and I can't remember his first name, but Nawaf al-Hazmi.
Right.
Now, these are two of the hijackers that would that were on the plane that went into the Pentagon, and they were active in San Diego, seemingly almost separate from what was going on in Florida. And there's some really odd facts about what was going on in San Diego. So, for instance, John, and I'll throw this one to you, Mihdhar and al-Hazmi were supposedly renting a house there in November of 1999. Now, this would be 2 months before Robert Mueller, FBI head, would state that they had actually entered into the U.S. Now, Mueller said they entered in January 2000. So, I mean, what is going on with that? I mean, now Mihdhar and al-Hazmi were in and this is from, like, at the time, mainstream news reports. I think it was the LA Times that first reported that they had seen, lease agreements saying that these guys had actually rented this apartment in 2 months before they were supposed to enter. I mean, what's going on with that, John?
I honestly, specifics like that are hard for me to remember off the top of my head. But as far as what's going on, I don't know, honestly. I know there were a lot of issues with the identities of the hijackers, of using false, passports and identifications and things like that. Maybe they were, being set up by whoever their helpers were, al-Hazmi or al-Bayoumi in San Diego, to show up there to set up a place for them. I don't know what the specifics are about that. I don't remember. But, the whole Saudi issue is a very complex issue. And so far as I knew, I thought they came in, like you said, in January 5th, 2000, I think. I don't remember.
Yeah, very early in January.
And I think they stayed, or they were, there were 2 weeks that were missing, I think, from when they first got here. Like, nobody knew where they were, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
For those 2 weeks. But I think that it was found that al-Hazmi may have introduced them, I don't know, to maybe Bayoumi, and helped them set up with the, apartment or house that they were at.
So I just pulled it up. This is, again, I'll link up to this in the show notes. But the Washington Post refers to hijackers Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar when it later reports, quote, in November 1999, 2 Saudi Arabian men moved into a ground floor apartment at the Parkwood Apartments, a townhouse complex near a busy commercial strip in San Diego. Al-Hazmi's name is on the lease beginning in November 1999, it's the Washington Post reporting. Then the LA Times similarly notes a man by the name Al-Hazmi moved to the Parkwood Apartments in San Diego in 1999, according to manager Holly Ratchford. Some reports even have them visiting the U.S. as early as 1996, and that was from the Wall Street Journal and the Las Vegas Review-Journal. However, FBI Director Mueller has stated that the two hijackers did not arrive in the U.S. until the middle of January 2000 after attending an important al-Qaeda summit in Malaysia. So I guess, I brought that up. I mean, we don't have to get into the specifics of, when they did, but that's just a wonderful little example of, again, facts being reported that completely kind of contradict the entire narrative. And it also makes it very difficult in trying to kind of piece this together and to explain this. Where you've got these two guys that are seemingly, they're in the U.S. before. There's also, I mean, to kind of just add some, like, another level of strangeness, one of their landlords is an Indian guy by the name Abdussattar Shaikh, who was recruited. Say again, John?
Abdussattar Shaikh.
Yes. Well, explain who he is, because he's like another little interesting character.
Well, he was the landlord for the two of them, and he was also an FBI informant. Stephen Butler, I think, was his handler.
Yeah.
And I think Stephen said that if, he had been given the information that the CIA had on those two, they could have prevented 9/11. And I think he was adamant about that. The Bush administration fought against him testifying in front of the Joint Congressional Inquiry, and he did not. But he did testify, I believe, in front of the 9/11 Commission, and I believe his MFR, his memoranda for the record, is available online at History Commons or hcgroups.wordpress, whatever their blog site is. I think it's available there, so you can read about it or about him and his story, or what he says is his story there. There's also, on my Gold 9472 YouTube account, there's a video about Abdussattar Shaikh in Lemon Grove.
Yes, Lemon Grove, California, yeah.
I think he said he was a professor, but wasn't a professor.
Yeah. And also he was recruited as an asset informant like years before, like in 94.
Right.
Which is just, again, it almost makes you become conspiratorial, but it's like, of all the landlords in San Diego, we just have, these two guys happen to pick this Indian guy who's an informant for the FBI. I hate kind of thinking like that they were planning this that far ahead, but it is, I don't know, it is interesting again that this is the guy. And then of course that he doesn't really give the FBI all of the information, right? He's sort of hazy about some of the details as well.
Let me read to you this one entry from History Commons about him, because it is very, quote unquote explosive. October 9th, 2002, FBI agent handled 9/11 hijackers landlord is the title of the entry. And it says, San Diego FBI agent Stephen Butler reportedly gives, quote, explosive, end quote, testimony to the 9/11 congressional inquiry. Butler, recently retired, has been unable to speak to the media, but he was the handler for Abdussattar Shaikh, an FBI informant who rented a room to 9/11 hijackers Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar. Butler claims he might have uncovered the 9/11 plot if the CIA had provided the FBI with more information earlier about al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar. He says, quote, it would have made a huge difference, end quote. He suggests they would have quickly found the two hijackers because they were, quote, very, very close. We would have immediately opened investigations. We would have given them full court press. We would have done everything physical surveillance, technical surveillance, and other assets, end quote. Butler discloses that he had been monitoring a flow of Saudi Arabian money that wound up in the hands of hijackers, but his supervisors failed to take any action on the warnings. It is not known when Butler started investigating the money flow or when he warned his supervisors. The FBI tried to prevent Butler from testifying, but was unsuccessful. And, when you say the FBI, you're saying the Bush administration. Following Butler's testimony, Staff Director Eleanor Hill, quote, details his statements in a memo to the Justice Department, end quote. The Justice Department will decline to comment on the matter, stop the U.S. government from deporting Baznan to Saudi Arabia several weeks later, Osama Baznan, who is also accused of being supporters of those two. But the 9/11 Commission, I think, absolved him, along with Princess Haifa. Do you remember that story?
No. Elaborate a bit more, John.
Oh, well, Princess Haifa is the wife of Prince Bandar.
Oh, yes, right, okay.
And apparently money from her made it to the hijackers. And the first financing monograph from the 9/11 Commission explicitly states that Princess Haifa and Osama Baznan were not involved. But, the 28 redacted pages that were released, not released, and redactions throughout the 28 pages, but they said that Bandar himself gave money to Osama Baznan directly. It wasn't through his wife, it was Bandar himself. And so, there's a whole big story about that, but unfortunately, Judge George B. Daniels, who we spoke about last time, allowed the 9/11 family members to continue their suit against, or to allow discovery against Saudi Arabia as far as al-Thumari and al-Bayoumi go, but not with regards to Osama Baznan, which the families were requesting, which would have connected Bandar, possibly to 9/11. But he didn't allow discovery on him, which is odd.
Yes, listeners, John, who Omar al-Bayoumi is, because he comes up quite a bit. And as you said, there's the 9/11 families have been able to go after him a bit. And I think he's an important little cog in all of this, obviously. And he's been reported about. But who is this? Because he's a real character as well.
I think he worked for a company called Dallas or Dalla. I have History Commons up, but I'm not looking. Okay, it says Omar al-Bayoumi, an associate of the 9/11 hijackers Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, will receive a salary from Dalla, despite apparently doing no work. Some will accuse al-Bayoumi of involvement in funding the 9/11 plot, but that remains to be proven. Let's see.
What is it?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Dalla Avco is a Saudi aviation company which has extensive ties to the Ministry of Defense and Aviation in Saudi Arabia.
And here's a great entry about it. It says, a Saudi named Omar al-Bayoumi arrives in San Diego, and this is August 1994 to July 2000. Possible terrorist frontman with Saudi backing settles in San Diego. They suggest that he's a possible Saudi government spy. It says acquaintances in San Diego longest suspect al-Bayoumi is a Saudi government spy reporting on the activities of Saudi-born college students. Says one witness, quote, he was always watching young Saudi college students, always checking up on them, literally following them around, and then apparently reporting their activities back to Saudi Arabia. Chairman of the 9/11 Congressional Inquiry, Senator Bob Graham, and his investigators will, quote, find it obvious that the amiable al-Bayoumi was a low-ranking Saudi intelligence agent, end quote. And, quote, someone who had been put on the ground in San Diego by his government to keep an eye on the activities of the relatively large Saudi community in Southern California, end quote. I mean, that's essentially, it says, just prior to moving to the U.S., al-Bayoumi worked for the Saudi Ministry of Defense and Aviation, headed by Prince Sultan. His salary in this job was approved by Hamid al-Rashid, Saudi government. His son, Saud al-Rashid, is strongly suspected of al-Qaeda ties. Once in San Diego, al-Bayoumi tells people that he is a student or a pilot, and even claims to be receiving monthly payments from family in India. However, he is none of these things. In fact, as he tells some people, he receives a monthly stipend from Dawla Avco, a Saudi Asian company that has extensive ties to the Saudi Ministry of Defense and Aviation. From early 1995 until 2002, al-Bayoumi is paid about $3,000 a month for a project in Saudi Arabia, even though he is living in the U.S. According to the New York Times, congressional officials believe he is, quote, a ghost employee, end quote, doing no actual work. The classified section of the 9/11 Congressional Inquiry will note that his payments increase significantly just after he comes into contact with the two hijackers in early 2000. So what they're suggesting, and what a lot of people have suggested, is that the money increased so that he could give it to, the two alleged hijackers.
Oh yeah, and again, just to clarify, because we're throwing a lot of information out there, this is like one small aspect of this. You know what I mean? Like this is we're talking about maybe a year or two in San Diego where all of this is going on. You've got what many people, I think, rightfully say, call al-Bayoumi as a low-level intelligence operative for Saudi Arabia, who is inserted into, San Diego, Southern California, in order to watch over just two of the hijackers. That's it. And he's getting money from Bandar and Bandar's wife that's being funneled in there. You've got. Oh, no, go ahead, John. Jump in.
I was just going to say allegedly. Go ahead.
Yeah, allegedly, yeah. Then, you've also got these multiple news reports that Mihdhar and al-Hazmi may have actually been in San Diego, at least 2 months, if not like a year, before any of this is actually even meant to be going on. And, just saying, this is just one small, and I'll throw in another sort of interesting layer, if people don't know, but al-Hazmi is, of course, very close with Anwar al-Awlaki.
Right.
And then you get meetings between al-Awlaki and al-Hazmi. You had al-Awlaki, he was at the Pentagon. Lunge at the Pentagon before 9/11, while he's also being investigated by the FBI. And then al-Awlaki also, another sort of like unexplored aspect of 9/11, another little interesting geographical area is Denver. There's a whole thing going on in Denver, Colorado. Al-Awlaki has connections to the Denver Islamic Society there in Colorado. There's also a very bizarre report that bin Laden had like some sort of like communication center in Denver that was set up for him by a London-based company at one point. And this is just like one little strand, John.
Well, one thing I'd like to point out is that it sounds to me like you've recently read a lot of this stuff. Fine. Because I honestly, off the top of my head, I couldn't do it. These are just the ones that I don't know. I've just always been really fascinated with the San Diego stuff, and then because of course it brings in al-Awlaki, who's I assume he's some sort of a Pentagon asset or something. I don't really know. But he's just such a strange figure to be connected to these guys. And I've also just been fascinated with it because it is like you really can begin to kind of piece together this stuff where clearly there's a case to be made here. And you could actually put some of these Saudi officials on trial.
because I mean it's just the al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar are just seem to be up to their eyeballs in all this stuff.
Right.
But I guess, Jon, what do you make though of just the sort of lack of I don't know, clarity when it comes to these sorts of things? I mean, why were these never even really looked at? I mean, again, is this just part of the larger cover-up?
Are you talking about the 9/11 truth movement or the investigations into 9/11?
I think both, really. I mean, I know that some of 9/11 truth movement has looked into this, but it seems like a lot of what was going on in San Diego and then by extension Denver is just sort of like irrelevant to them. I don't know, maybe because it doesn't fit into the prevailing narrative that this was all, George Bush and Cheney and holograms and there were no hijackers, all that kind of nonsense.
Well, what you're essentially doing and what History Commons is great at doing is showing contradictions into what we were led to believe or not even told about. And so, there are so many things besides all of the news about al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar. It boggles the mind. There's just so much information, which is why I said to keep it simple. Why haven't people focused on it? Because they don't know where to start to look, or, the investigations, they looked into it a lot. But they were, Philip Zelikow was in charge of the 9/11 Commission. He authored or helped to author the 9/11 report, and he was very instrumental in making sure that all Saudi, or the Saudi connections weren't put two to two. He didn't put two and two together. He didn't allow people to do that. And one example, rest in peace, Dana Lieseman, who was, she actually helped to write, I believe, or authored the 28 redacted pages. And she wanted access to them she served on the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11 and on the 9/11 Commission. And she wanted access to those 28 pages so she could do her job. And Zelikow, Philip Zelikow, the executive director of the 9/11 Commission, blocked her access to them. So she went through a back channel to gain access through them so she could do her job, and Zelikow fired her for that. He blocked half of the interview requests for Saudi investigators. He helped to rewrite the report to, take out Saudi complicity from the 9/11 report in a, quote, late-night editing session with Dieter Snell. My God, there are so many things that just were not covered to the extent that they should have been. And, I can't answer for any one thing. I can theorize as to why, because they wanted to protect Saudi Arabia, for whatever reason. Last time I was on your show, I talked about a possible collaboration between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, and I don't know if that's true. Or maybe it's just the policy of the U.S. government over the years. When you look through the 90s, we protected them all the time, and after 9/11, all the time, with regard to their connections to terrorism. We even worked with them with regard to their connections to terrorism and other things. Robert Wright, the 9/11 whistleblower, was involved in an investigation he called Vulgar Betrayal, which was shut down. Before 9/11, George Tenet was good friends with Prince Bandar and was having meetings with him and wasn't telling his subordinates what they talked about or something to that effect. It's who knows? But when you look at, everything else besides Saudi Arabia and 9/11, like the FAA, like the CIA, like the FBI, there's
Pakistan.
There's so much more to this story. Pakistan, possibly is.
Well, we are at the break right now. We will be continuing the conversation with Jon Gold in the second hour, so please stay tuned.
I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Simply Clean Foods is dedicated to providing the best quality food you can buy next to fresh from a farmer's market. Our stringent quality controls and absolute zero GMOs plus testing for heavy metals makes us unique in the storable foods market. Our line of fruits, vegetables, and meats are suitable for everyday use, and you won't have to worry about throwing away valuable groceries ever again. Take out the amount you need and reseal the package for use within the next 6 months. Simply Clean Foods' primary focus is to bring clean food to people all around the world and change the way we look at freeze-dried food in our daily cooking. Go to simplycleanfoods.net. That's www.simplycleanfoods.net today.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
I don't like words that hide the truth. I don't like words that conceal reality. I don't like euphemisms. And American English is loaded with euphemisms because Americans have a lot of trouble dealing with reality. Americans have trouble facing the truth. So they invent a kind of a soft language to protect themselves from it. I'll give you an example of that. When I was a little kid, if I got sick, they wanted me to go to the hospital and see the doctor. Now they want me to go to a health maintenance organization. Smug, greedy, well-fed white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. It's as simple as that. The CIA doesn't kill anybody anymore. They neutralize people. The government doesn't lie. It engages in disinformation. Israeli murderers are called commandos. Arab commandos are called terrorists. Contra killers are called freedom fighters. Well, if crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight? They never mention that part of it to us, do they? Never mention that part of it.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom, and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs, and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control, zero, out. Control is good. 5, roger, copy. 3, 2, 1. Engage. Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you Live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are joining us here in the second hour, we are speaking with Jon Gold, who is a 9/11 researcher and activist. Jon was a friend of the show. He was on back on episode 131. Jon, of course, has a new book out, We Were Lied to About 9/11, the interviews, which you can find. You can get a free copy of the book. You can download it directly from the website wewereliedtooabout911.com, which we will link up to in the show notes. Jon, we were kind of talking about a whole bunch of different little interesting aspects and nuggets. Of course, as you rightfully pointed out, I've been reading about them nonstop in preparation. So I was throwing out a lot of little curveballs and things like that. But again, we were talking about the San Diego stuff and al-Mihdhar and strange informants and the Denver connection to all of this. And the Denver one is one maybe I can do a little mini episode on, because it's such a strange, bizarre little factor to this. But I thought we would kind of switch things up a little bit and still within the vein of 9/11. Recently, Gina Haspel was essentially, she was now confirmed to be head of the Central Intelligence Agency. She got the, backing of basically, there were a few holdouts and some Democrats came around and, confirmed that, she would be fine. She's sort of rejected torture. Just like Obama, we're never going to do this again. Gina Haspel has said the same thing, lessons learned. Let's just move on from this. And you've interviewed before on your show, and it's included in the book, Andy Worthington, who's done tremendous work on the subject of torture. He's done a lot advocating for the detainees in Guantanamo Bay who, have still not been charged with anything, and they're just rotting away in prison there. And I guess, Jon, just first and foremost, what was your initial feeling when Gina Haspel was first sort of floated? And then during the confirmation, because I almost fell out of my chair when her name was floated that this is who Trump was looking to, head up the CIA. And then I, did fall out of my chair when, all of his little cronies and MAGA supporters were just, gleeful at the idea that this torturer was going to be head of the CIA, that this was a good thing. Don't worry, she's going to take on the deep state. It's more of this sort of fantasy. But what was your feeling when Gina Haspel was confirmed?
Business as usual was my first thought, and we're almost as bad as we could get in this country. I don't, it wasn't a big surprise to me. Can you name the last time somebody was sent for something like that and was turned down for a CIA director's position or FBI director?
Absolutely.
I don't know. Can you?
No, I want to say the last one that sort of sticks in my mind was speaking of 9/11, I think it was during Bush's administration after 9/11, and it was like, what was it? It was like a federal judge or somebody. Remember? I can't remember what it was. It was a woman who he nominated, and they had to, remove her. And I forget who they put in. It might have been Gonzalez. I can't remember. But that's the last time I remember something, but yeah, like you said, it almost always happens.
Right. And so what that tells me is, again, the Democrats and Republicans are one and the same, essentially. And a lot of people argue that they aren't, but then they end up agreeing on things like this or letting things like this happen or allowing the NDAA to be passed, which was just occurred, and it's the largest ever, the National Defense for Authorization Act. I think it's $717 billion. It's amazing how that works. They're supposedly anti-war. And, first of all, these wars are based on lies. And we've known that for years, and we're still in them. And so, that tells me that the Democrats and Republicans are bought and paid for, essentially, and are part of one and the same, the war party. A lot of people have called them over the years. I don't know. I don't know what to say other than it's gotten so bad and so offensive, and it's so overt now, as opposed to, first of all, I didn't even know she was responsible or ordered the destruction of those interrogation tapes.
That was news to me, too, but it doesn't surprise me.
Right, and I had an extensive collection on the whole interrogations tape thing, and her name didn't show up once. So that was new. It boggles the mind, and it doesn't, because I've been watching this for so long.
Well, I found it very interesting and some sort of double speak, double think going on during Haspel's confirmation hearings, where she unequivocally, said she supported, she still supports. She would never take back the CIA interrogation program. She thought it was good. She is fine. She can live with the fact that she ordered the destruction of the tapes. She thinks that was a good idea, too, because it protected the identity of agents, so torturers. But then at the same time, it's sort of like, please do confirm me because I'm kind of sorry, and I promise we won't do this again.
How many times has America, repeated history, unfortunately?
Yeah, exactly. Here's the other, the sort of interesting aspect to this is that it came out as a result of, reporters digging into Haspel's background, the confirmation. There's also some, information like John Kiriakou. He knew Haspel, I think personally at the time. And of course, Kiriakou is one of the only people that actually went to jail over the CIA torture program, and that was because he revealed that Gina Haspel had ordered the destruction of those tapes. But it's now fairly well confirmed that she was present for at least some of the over 100 times that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was beaten and waterboarded. That Haspel was there, I believe.
I don't know how many times she was there. When I heard that story, I remember thinking of Alfreda Francis Bukowski, who was another name that was classified for years until Rory O'Connor, Ray Novoselsky. They worked on that aspect of 9/11 and uncovered her name, verified her name, and I remember that she went to go watch the waterboarding or the torture because she thought it would be an enjoyable experience or something to that effect. But,
she got off on it. I mean, I think in the Jane Mayer article in the New Yorker that is referring to Bukowski, she describes her as smiling and laughing and enjoying watching the torture.
And I can't fathom that. We say the torture is over. And how long ago did we hear about rectal feeding in Guantanamo, which is torture? It wasn't that long ago. And, do you really think we're done with that kind of thing? I don't know. I don't think we are.
Well, that was my interpretation of the Gina Haspel ascension, was that this is the government's way of basically just stating to the world, that not only did torture never go away, but now we're done. We don't even really have to pretend anymore that we're not going to do it. That Haspel's confirmation is basically just their way of stating that we're going to be doing it even more and that we don't have to talk about it anymore. Because, Haspel... Because this is the thing, half of the people that support Haspel want torture, and then the other half are, but she sort of denounced it, so we're okay now.
It's
and, whereas I think it's just, this is like, all right, we're done.
I saw a poll online that asked whether or not we should be torturing or something to that effect. And it was overwhelmingly for torture. And I remember years ago, the 9/11 Truth Movement used to destroy those kinds of online polls with our numbers and stuff like that. And I can't imagine who is doing that wants torture. And, somebody made a point years ago. One of the reasons we don't torture or we shouldn't be torturing is because when our soldiers are captured, we don't want them tortured.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge point that a lot of people seem to miss. But aside from the fact that torture is abhorrent and should never, be done ever, war shouldn't be done ever. But, a lot of things shouldn't be done ever that we've seen, and unfortunately, they've been done.
Yeah. And, of course, we should point out that if people didn't see this, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed himself, I believe he relayed this through his lawyer in Guantanamo, that he actually wanted to submit, it was something like 6 paragraphs about Gina Haspel. And, of course, this was, why should we believe, I mean, here's the funny thing, John. The chorus is, why should we believe this guy? He's a terrorist, and nothing he says can be true. But we tortured him, let me pull it up, 183 times over 15 sessions, where he was stripped naked, doused with water, slapped, slammed into a wall, given rectal rehydrations without medical need, shackled into painful stress positions, and sleep deprived for about a week by being forced to stand with his hands chained above his head. Well, I mean, then shouldn't whatever he says be completely accurate if torture works? I mean, then whatever the hell his 6 paragraphs are, we should utterly believe every single word of it. I mean, that to me just sort of illustrated the whole nonsense with it, where it's not even, it's not about getting information with these people. It's about inflicting trauma on others.
Well, when I think about him being tortured and I hear about people not wanting to hear what he has to say, that nothing he says has any value or whatever. And then I look to the 9/11 report, which sourced him, I think it was 211 times, even though they put a disclaimer in the report about torture and so forth. And in my book, there are actually two chapters kind of devoted to this. Well, the first one is with Robbie Martin, and we talk about how the 9/11 report is based on torture. And we talk about how, information obtained from torture is not reliable. In fact, I think I started out the show by saying, it says, quote, I mean, if we want to really have a quick interview, torture is bad. Okay, Robbie, have a good day. That was the beginning of the interview, but the whole thing was about how the 9/11 report was based on that. And I spoke to Andy Worthington, who's done a tremendous amount of work on Guantanamo Bay in general, trying to bring attention to everything that's going on in there. He was cited by the New York Times once, and they actually gave him a hard time, I think, because of that. I don't remember what the story was off the top of my head, but it was an amazing interview that just focused on so many things. If I just read his bio for people, it would be interesting.
I highly recommend all of Andy Worthington's work.
Right. And he and I, I used to try to convince him to speak out on the fact that we were lied to about 9/11. Not that 9/11 was an inside job, but the possibility of complicity in our government. And he and I would go back and forth. And I had the same experience with so many people over the years, but he and I developed a friendship. So that's how I managed to get him on the show. And there are a lot of little stories like that. But his bio says, Andy Worthington is a freelance investigative journalist, activist, author, photographer, filmmaker, and singer-songwriter. He is the co-founder of the, quote, Close Guantanamo campaign, the director of, quote, We Stand with Shaker, I think he's been released, calling for the immediate release from Guantanamo of Sheikh Amir, the last British resident in the prison, and the author of the Guantanamo Files, the stories of the 774 detainees in America's illegal prison, and of two other books, Stonehenge, Celebration and Subversion, and The Battle of Beanfield. He is also the co-director of the documentary film Outside the Law, Stories from Guantanamo. He has written for the New York Times and The Guardian, and is currently writing for Al Jazeera. He also worked with the United Nations, WikiLeaks, and Reprieve. But remember, this interview took place in March 2015. I don't know what he's doing today, if it's all the same. He was just a very good, very interesting interview that just got into so many... The point of the interview that I did, and I tried to explain this at the beginning of every interview, what the purpose of, was to show that there can be no justice at Guantanamo Bay at all. None. And, when Obama came into office, he was going to have the 9/11-5 tried in New York, and then there was so much pushback from that. People like Rudy Giuliani and just
Peter King.
Yeah, it's Peter King. It was just horrible. But meanwhile, the September 11th advocates, or the Jersey Girls, released a statement at the time showing how successful, federal court has been in trying terrorist cases. Because that was the argument, that it wouldn't be successful. And everybody was saying that it was because of the torture that they did not want to bring it into federal court. But I'm sure it was a lot of other issues as well. They don't like, the government doesn't like when 9/11 makes it into a real courtroom. They fought against that for years. They fight against it, it seems, every time. Like the Saudi issue. They fought against that for years and years and years. And then finally, JASTA was allowed. But, if you go to 28pages.org, Brian McGlinchey wrote an article about the recent ruling that Judge George B. Daniels handed down about the two that they're allowing discovery on, and the one that wasn't. And he wrote that they still have a get out of, they could still get out of this kind of thing. I don't remember what he said exactly. The article is called "In Bloated Kingdom, Judge Rejects Saudi Effort to Escape 9/11 Suit." Anyway,
we will link up to that article in the show notes. No. I was just going to say, they really don't like when it comes into a federal court, again, because then they can't really control every single aspect of the narrative. Right. When it's in a secretive military tribunal in Cuba, well then, yeah, they can control everything, which basically means there is no case. How many times has Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's case been, they keep pushing it back, and there's more appeals, and there's this, that, and the other thing, and they won't allow this. Whereas in a federal court, there actually has to be some progress. You can't just kind of sit around doing nothing for years and years. Right. And even so, when you do that, there are still docket sheets that have to be made public.
To me, it's a kangaroo court. There's no legitimacy to it. Like you said, they control every aspect of it. So, they get to decide what evidence is shown and what evidence isn't shown, and things to that effect, and so many other things like different witnesses that could be called, and all kinds of things that they just won't do, and that they could do in federal court or a regular courtroom.
Well, and the last thing they want is for some of these guys to be put on the stand to actually, like in the case of the 9/11 family suit against Saudi Arabia, if they really put the pressure on some of these guys, they probably will say something that, in order to save their own skin. And that's the last thing that they don't want these guys ever talking about some of this stuff that was going.
I'm sorry, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed had ties to the Pakistani ISI.
Yes.
We don't hear about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that won't be brought up in court. or in the military tribunals. There's so many things. And that seems to be a theme, by the way. Osama bin Laden was connected to the ISI. One of the alleged paymasters of 9/11, Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh, had connections to the ISI. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed has ties to the ISI. And I think the name of Osama bin Laden's handler was Ijaz Shah, Shah, and I believe I wrote about that years ago. Because I spoke to the journalist who reported it. And he was the one to tell me about it. It's in my first book. Now, what else do you want to talk about with regards to Gitmo?
Well, I mean, I think we can move on from Gitmo, but I guess just to say that it does seem as if the promises of kind of moving on from this are just sort of fastly disappearing. We're not moving on, and it seems like Trump's insistence on expanding Gitmo, seemingly, on having Haspel elevated, on like Giuliani, who's certainly a 9/11 insider in all of this, moving these people into positions of power. It does seem intended to kind of just basically just kind of I think extend this stuff. I mean, I think under Obama, let's say, Gitmo, while it was never going to be closed, there was at least this semblance that, okay, it's this horrible thing, but we can't really do anything about it. So we'll just kind of leave it in limbo. Whereas now, my impression is that Gitmo will actually be expanded. That, we might see more stuff happening there. We might actually, God, only knows what's going to happen the next couple of years with the stuff, in terms of Iran and Syria and Afghanistan. So it seems almost like they're kind of opening the doors for a lot of the stuff that, while it wasn't closed, it was sort of pushed aside. It was a little bit more hidden. Now, I'm not saying that's any better or worse, but that is my impression of what Trump seems to be doing, or his administration at least. I don't know how much he's really involved in the day-to-day operations.
Just to point out the fact, Obama could have closed Gitmo at any time he wanted to. And believe that they were blaming the Republicans for not being able to close it. But he could have, arbitrarily closed it. He didn't. And he promised to. Yeah. So, now Trump, his policies are just Obama did these things and the media didn't report on them at the level they will with Trump, because they have to maintain this false left-right paradigm. Democrats are the good guys, supposedly, and Republicans are the bad guys, but they're both horrible. But, if you can present them in ways where they don't seem to be, and that's what happened. So Trump is more overtly calling for, not torture, but Gitmo to be opened and all the immigration things. And it's sad. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I mean, they've also woven in, all of these more bizarre tinfoil hat conspiracy theories on the internet. Trump is going to send all the pedophiles to Gitmo, and Hillary, and, the MS-13 gangsters are all going to go down to Guantanamo. And, it's like, what would that, I mean, and that again to me is just like, but nothing will happen. It's like you want to lock her up, quote unquote, then have Hillary Clinton tried in federal court. Like in Guantanamo, nothing is going to happen. She's just going to sit there.
It's never going to happen.
No, of course not. No, go ahead, John.
I forget what I was going to say. Oh God, now I do forget what I was going to say. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to quickly before we forget, you mentioned Alfreda Bukowski, who is a high-ranking member of Alex Station, which again is one of the things like I always point people to if they're interested in kind of, going beyond the mainstream talking points about 9/11 is to look at Alex Station, because they really did know what was going on, and they not that they dropped the ball. I mean, they were actively making sure that information was not being passed. And it also dispels a lot of the myths about some of the so-called, the so-called truth tellers about, 9/11, like Michael Scheuer, who was intimately involved in Alex Station. There's no surprise that his book, which is interesting, on Osama bin Laden, but it's no surprise that Osama bin Laden recommended that book, because Scheuer was, probably friends with him, and that's my contention. But Alfreda Bukowski, of course, is also married to Michael Scheuer, and they just also seem kind of connected with that whole clique with Gina Haspel and the torture and stuff like that. But I brought up the Michael Scheuer thing in sort of a roundabout way because we talked about this last time you were on the show, but there's a television series, it's on Hulu, I believe, or Hulu or Amazon, I can't remember. Hulu. And it is it's Hulu. It's an adaptation of Lawrence Wright's book, The Looming Tower, which I was actually the very first book I ever read on 9/11 when I was in high school. And I haven't seen the show yet, although I do plan on watching it at some point and doing something on it. But, we talked about it last time, John, because it was just like, why the hell are they doing The Looming Tower now? It just seems like it's coming out of nowhere. But, oddly, Michael Scheuer is a prominent character in the series. He's portrayed by Peter Sarsgaard. And we were talking about this during the break, John, but they've actually changed his name, though. I think his name is Michael Schmidt in the show, but it's clearly. Oh, go ahead, jump in.
Well, I remembered what I wanted to say is that a lot of people think that Trump is on the side of 9/11 people. He's not. He's not, and I hope people stop believing that, because he hasn't done anything to help with the 9/11 situation. The reason that Judge George B. Daniels made a decision. Well, number one, the evidence is just so overwhelming. But number two, JASTA was passed, the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, which happened under Obama, even though he tried to veto it. So, Trump is not on the side of those who are interested in truth, accountability, and justice concerning the 9/11 attacks, no matter how much or how many times people say it. Now, with regards to the Looming Tower and Michael Scheuer, I just found out. I haven't been watching it because I can't watch what I presume to be propaganda about 9/11. It just, in the years past, I've tried watching United 93, and it just sets me too much. And now that, when I get stressed, I get pain, I try to avoid those kinds of things. So, and the world still stresses me out and still causes pain. I can't avoid it, but I do my best. The Looming Tower, I just found out that his name was not being used, and he was on the news countless times. In the post 9/11 world, everybody knows who he was, and I can't fathom why his name wouldn't be used. Why now, retroactively classifying him or his name? It doesn't make any sense.
Oh, and if people haven't
found that out, I'm sorry, really quick. When I found that out and I pointed out his real name, I jokingly said, "There, I just debunked the Looming Tower."
No, and people should look up the Peter Sarsgaard's character. He looks like Scheuer. He's got a beard and glasses. And from what I've read, and I will watch it at some point so I can comment on it more definitively, but from what I read, there's no doubt that it's Scheuer. And they've, again, they portray Scheuer as the adult in the room, that he's part of the older version of the CIA that was really about protecting America and was a true patriot, and all of this nonsense that Scheuer has used to enrich his own life financially, through his books and his media appearances, and then getting himself involved in with like Ron Paul and convincing a lot of people within that movement he was some sort of a messiah, patriot type figure who was going to tell them the truth about 9/11. And, again, just keep in mind the whole time, he's like married to this chief torturer and Bukowski herself made sure that key information about 9/11 did not reach the FBI. So, I mean, Scheuer's got a lot to answer for just on that. Not to mentioning the fact that he was running the Alex Station, or was, deeply involved in Alex Station at one point.
The one thing I remember most about Michael Scheuer was the fact that he said that, I think on 10 separate occasions, he was told, sorry, my phone is ringing. He was told not to, or to allow bin Laden to escape, or something to that effect. Or there were 10 different times we had an opportunity to take out Osama.
Yes.
That's what I remember him mostly for. And I remember, of course, Alex Station and all that stuff, but he was replaced, by Richard Lee and so forth. But go ahead.
Oh no, just it is very bizarre that they, like you said, they've like retroactively classified Michael Scheuer in this TV show. And it just doesn't make any sense because clearly there are other historical figures, Ali Soufan, they use his real name in the show. Obviously George Tenet, and some of these other big wigs. But I'm not 100% sure, but I believe also that Alfreda Bukowski's character is also, that name is changed, and they've combined it, her and a few others. They sort of made this sort of amalgamated character that's loosely based on her. So jump in.
The one thing I've learned over the years is that the CIA does not want any attention brought to this issue. And obviously they're the ones who made the requests to redact their names or change their names. I would assume it was them, because they just don't want people looking up those kinds of things. I would think, and I'm sure there are many people now who think whatever his name was, Michael Schmidt in the show, is the real name of the guy. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, so, I'm sure Rich Blee's name isn't in it, or Tom Wilshire, or any of those other people. Because, like you said, I think when it comes to that aspect, the CIA wants absolutely nobody to know what Alex Station was doing.
Exactly.
Because, again, the documentable proof that they were, that they were actively involved in covering up what was going on, there's no doubt about it.
Also Rich Blee, I think, was involved with the Tora Bora decision that allowed Osama bin Laden to escape. That's another thing that just popped in my head. Go ahead.
Oh no, stuff like 9/11 Press for Truth, Who is Rich Blee, audio documentary. All of that stuff was, I think, kind of hit a little bit too close for home for a lot of them. And, I probably sound like a broken record to many people, but the Alex Station, if you wanted to put some Americans on trial, then the whole Alex Station should be indicted.
Yep.
Because, they're up to their eyeballs in all of this.
Not Doug Miller or Mark Rossini. They should be brought in for questioning.
Yes.
The other people need to be indicted and so forth. Brought in on trial, just like you said. They deserve it. They knew that the hijackers were in the country. They didn't do anything. They didn't tell the FBI. The NSA also knew that they were in the country and did not tell the FBI. That's another story that only recently came to light, within the last few years because of Bill Binney, Thomas Drake, which is something I talked about in my book, during my interview with Thomas Drake. So not only did the CIA know, but the NSA knew as well. And the NSA, the 9/11 Commission barely investigated them. They spent one day, I believe, looking through their information. And guess what? The information they found supposedly tied Iran to 9/11.
Yeah.
Surprise. Like, that just, It's just disgusting. Which also shows, again, that the 9/11 Commission can't be trusted as the definitive account of 9/11. So, again, listen to the Thomas Drake, or read now the Thomas Drake interview, and you'll see. So, so many people should have been held accountable. That's so sad to me. The families, they hoped and prayed that the 9/11 Commission would hold people accountable for lying under oath. Well, first of all, the 9/11 Commission didn't even hold people under oath in the beginning. They had to be shamed into doing so by the families and by 9/11 Citizens Watch, which was a group that worked with the 9/11 families. So they hoped that people would be held accountable. And the very first public hearing, Thomas Keane said, "We're not here to point fingers at anybody." So, nobody was held accountable. Nobody. I think Mary Ryan, who was the person who set up the Visa Express program, which some of the hijackers used to get into this country, which was set up before 9/11, which was set up only for the country of Saudi Arabia to make it easier for people to get visas. I think she was held accountable, but she was also given a big bonus. I think she resigned, but was also given a massive bonus. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, Bukowski is the same thing. I mean, she was, her involvement in destroying evidence at Alex Station was brought up, and then she was sort of shuffled around. And the last few articles I read about her, maybe like a year or so ago, she was like head of some global terrorism unit within the CIA. So again, elevated. They're constantly, if they don't get, maybe they get fired, but like you said, they get a big bonus. Or they're kind of shamed for, a few months, and then they're moved around, and they go on to do other stuff. That's also just how they keep them all in line and ensure that they're never going to, turn on them in the future if you keep, elevating them and giving them more money and things like that. John, I did want to quickly, we've got maybe like about 20 minutes or so left. 15, 20 minutes. And I did want to just touch a little bit on Rudy Giuliani, only because he's sort of back in the news more and more, mainly because he's now apparent, he's being portrayed as being Trump's lawyer. I don't really know how accurate that is, but he certainly is.
Buddy hanging out with him at the White House. Going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Get up for it. Go ahead.
And, and Giuliani, I also just, there's a special place in my heart for despising Rudy Giuliani, being a New Yorker, and of course having to, live under his reign, and certainly under 9/11, and the way that, Giuliani, after 9/11, he's the people's mayor and all of this propaganda.
He was just booed at Yankee Stadium.
Was he? I didn't see that.
His birthday, his 74th birthday. And they announced it, I think, or he said something he went there. I don't know, but everybody booed his name. And this is... This was, quote unquote, America's mayor. Now, I found an entry specific to Rudy Giuliani from History Commons that I'm just going to read for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
All right. May 19th, 2004. 9/11 Commission reaches self-confessed, quote, low point, end quote, in Giuliani questioning. The second day of the 9/11 Commission hearings about the emergency response on the day of the attacks is dominated by questioning of former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, which Commission Chairman Tom Keene and Vice Chairman Lee Hamilton will describe as the Commission's, quote, low point. And I think they were forced to do that. I'm stopping the reading the entry, but I think they were forced to do that because the families were furious about that questioning. And if you go watch his testimony, you can see there are people screaming at the commission because of what was transpiring that day, because of the questions that they weren't asking him that day. So I'm going to continue. Giuliani had become a hero after the attacks, winning the Time Magazine Person of the Year award, and the commission was aware that it had to be careful about how it handled material it had uncovered, putting him in a bad light. However, Commissioner John Lehman had attacked the city's preparedness the previous day, leading to a, quote, Rudy Giuliani love fest, end quote, pointing out that, quote, many of the questions directed at Giuliani by the commissioners barely qualified as softballs. They were so gentle, end quote. Keenan Hamilton will admit that every commissioner, quote, opens his or her questioning with lavish praise, end quote. For instance, Richard Benveniste says, quote, your leadership on that day and in the days following gave the rest of the nation and indeed the world an unvarnished view of the indomitable spirit and the humanity of this great city, and for that I salute you, end quote. Jim Thompson thanks Giuliani for, quote, setting an example to us all, end quote. Lehman says, quote, there was no question the captain was on the bridge, end quote. Thomas Eads says, quote, New York City on that terrible day, in a sense, was blessed because it had you as a leader, end quote. And then it says, however, Giuliani suggests that hundreds of firefighters died when the North Tower collapsed because they had chosen to remain in the building, not because they had not received the order to evacuate due to problems with their radio system. This angers some of the audience members who shout, talk about the radios. Put one of us on the panel, just one of us, the families. Stop kissing ass. And my brother was a fireman, and I want to know why 300 firemen died. And I've got some real questions. Let's ask some real questions. Is that unfair? And it says, Keenan Hamilton will later write, quote, the questioning of Mayor Giuliani was a low point in terms of commission's questioning of witnesses at public hearings. We did not ask tough questions, nor did we get all of the information we needed to put it on the public record. Did not get all the information we needed. Amazing. We were affected by the controversy over Lehman's comments and by the excellent quality of the mayor's presentation. Oh, God. So, the families were screaming out that day. And the whole radio issue, when he was running for president, the 9/11 families made sure that he would never get into office. Now, if the 9/11 families went to those efforts to make sure he would not be in office, do you think you really know the truth about America's mayor? Mm. It boggles the mind. Just, God, the fact that he was booed, like I just said, that there's a reason for that. It's not just, I don't think it's just because of what he's doing for Trump, but there's just a history about this man and how horrible he was. There was what was his name from the Village Voice? James Ridgway. Yeah. Wrote a book, I think, the 5 remaining unanswered questions, or he wrote an article about Giuliani that just put him in such a bad light. He made $100 million, it was reported, off of the 9/11. Who was it that said noun, verb about Giuliani? Like, he couldn't stop talking about 9/11.
Oh, yeah. No, anytime he got in front of the camera. I mean, he still does that. At the RNC convention. I mean, he looked like some coked up monster screaming. And he was talking about 9/11, this, and, and I'll just say, too, him getting booed at Yankee Stadium, that is just indicative of how he is viewed universally in New York. This has nothing to do with Trump. Everybody here hates him. He was a horrible, awful man. The same way that real New Yorkers, despise Donald Trump. Now, the rest of the country might fawn over these two morons like they're, the greatest thing since sliced bread. But if you actually live in New York, you would hate these guys because they're idiots. And they were, and especially Giuliani's reputation in New York in relation to 9/11 is abysmal. And everybody agrees with that. You would be seriously hard pressed to find a New Yorker here, even the, working class, stiff, New Yorker, up to, snooty Upper East Side New Yorker. Everybody hates him. He's not well liked. Quickly, John, because you brought it up, explain the issue with the radios, because that is a fascinating little aspect.
I'd have to relook it up, but apparently, Rudy was responsible for replacing the radios that he never did, or if he did, he used faulty radios, or radios that were found to be faulty. I think that's the case. Again, there are videos on YouTube that were made by firemen, that were made, in association with 9/11 families to talk about this issue. I suggest you go look at them up. And one of the reasons that they made these videos was to make sure that he never found his way into the White House. And that, they wanted people to know that he needed to be held accountable and never was. And there was a news report, I believe, about Rudy that talked about how he worked with a terror sheikh. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I think that was in the Village Voice.
Oh, the Village Voice used to be great. I don't know. Are they still great?
No, they're pretty terrible. When Wayne Barrett was probably the last great vestige at the Village Voice, and he unfortunately he died like a year ago. And Wayne Barrett did great work on Roger Stone, Giuliani, Al Sharpton. Wayne Barrett even did some stuff, was involved in some of the reporting on some of the 9/11 stuff, because The Voice used to do great articles on 9/11. But yeah, Giuliani was deeply involved with this, like a known Al Qaeda operative.
I have this on my site. It's archived on my site. Rudy's ties to a terror sheikh. 3 weeks after 9/11, when the roar of fighter jets still haunted the city's skyline, the emir of gas-rich Qatar, Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, toured Ground Zero. Although a member of the emir's own royal family had harbored the man, who would later be identified as the mastermind of the attack, a man named Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, often referred to in intelligence circles by his initials KSM, Al Thani rushed to New York in its aftermath, offering to make a $3 million donation, principally to the families of the victims. Rudy Giuliani, apparently unaware of what the FBI and CIA had long known about Qatari's links to al-Qaeda, appeared on CNN with Al Thani that night and vouched for the emir when Larry King asked the mayor, "You are a friend of his, are you not?" And he says, "We had a very good meeting yesterday, very good." So if you just read the article, Rudy's ties to a terror sheikh, it'll tell you, that he had ties to, America's mayor had ties to a terror sheikh when we were in a war on terror, or still are in the war on terror, or now it's a war for a competition against Russia and China. Wasn't that declared when Trump came into office? Hello?
Oh, sorry, John, I just muted myself. I was going to say that, I hope that illustrates to people that still think, like you said, that Trump is some sort of advocate for 9/11 victims. Then why would he have Rudy Giuliani in his administration? Because, this guy we haven't even really mentioned the fact that, Giuliani was responsible for the destruction of almost all of the evidence, the buildings themselves.
Right. Exactly.
All of that was done by Giuliani.
That was all his doing. And, Anthony Weiner, despite what he did with the phones and so forth, he complained in early 2002 about how the evidence was being removed. Mm-hmm. Ground Zero. This is a quote from the article I just cited. In other words, as incredible as it might seem, Rudy Giuliani, whose presidential candidacy is steeped in 9/11 iconography, has been doing business with a government agency run by the very man who made the attacks on 9/11 possible. So there you go.
Yeah, it's...
that is Wayne Barrett.
Yes, it is, right? Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah. No, Wayne Barrett was... it's a shame that Wayne Barrett passed away. I did a tribute episode to him just after he died, because he was just a huge... he still is, because his stuff is amazing. And a lot of his work on Roger Stone, Giuliani, Al Sharpton, and 9/11 is just, it's fantastic. And it's a shame that he passed away, because he would have been a great asset, against some of the stuff that Trump and Giuliani and others are saying right now. Because Barrett was just an encyclopedia of all of the great dirt that was going on in New York City. But John, it just, again, it strikes me. We were sort of chatting a little bit about this during the break, but so many of these key players, we've got Giuliani right now, Gina Haspel, even John Bolton, the sort of anger and way that we're going after Iran right now. I mean, so many of this seems to harken back to the pre and post 9/11, world. And I just want to get your take on it.
It reminds me of what you said earlier about Guantanamo and projecting to the world. This is what we're about. We're about torture, or Gina Haspel being the CIA director, secretly saying to the world that we are going to continue torturing or something to that effect. I don't know if that's going to happen or if it's still happening. I don't know. But that's what it reminds me of, that we have all of these overt people now telling the world how militarily effed up we are and what we're willing to do and so on and so forth. So maybe that's what it's about. Again, Obama was portrayed differently, even though he was doing the same things. Now maybe it's time to tell the world that we're back to where we were, before 9/11, and we're that crazy. And we're making America great again, right? We're going back in time to 9/11. Oh God.
I mean, it's utterly depressing, but I think that's more when Trump is talking about this making America great again stuff. I mean, he is hearkening back to like that era. I mean, I know that in people's minds they think it's about what, I don't know. Apparently, in the 50s it was great or something. You know what I mean? That's the kind of level of intelligence that they might be thinking. It's gonna be great like back in the 50s or before that. But I think really, I mean, it's about making America or turning America back to this sort of neoconservative war on terror war state. And you see that with all these people that are surrounding Donald Trump right now, and the sort of rhetoric that is coming out of him when it comes to things like foreign policy in the Middle East, torture, the way he handles world events, all of this stuff really does seem to be like right out of the pre and post 9/11 handbook.
People take away his Twitter account.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. My God. Well, and I mean, the past week or so, his tweets have really become more and more unhinged. John, we're coming up towards the end of the show, and quickly, I just wanted you to remind everybody where they can go to get a free copy of your book, and where they can go to follow, your videos on YouTube and Twitter and all of that kind of stuff.
Okay, well, you can get the book at We Were Lied To About 911.com. It's available for free. And the reason that I did that was because I don't do this stuff. I haven't done this stuff for so many years to keep it to myself. And I didn't do this stuff so that the privileged few who could have, not few, but the privileged people who can afford to buy a book are the only ones who can read it. I wanted it to be available for everyone. And that's why I did that. It was my gift to everyone. My videos are available at Gold9472 on YouTube. Again, historycommons.org is just an amazing, amazing site that I hope everyone supports and goes to look at. And again, with regard to the 9/11 issue, support the families and their efforts for truth, accountability, and justice. Support the responders seeking health care, or, if they have difficulties with health care, which they still are, help them out with that, and do your best to again, keep it simple. Try to plant good seeds in people's minds so that they get an interest and go look at it for themselves.
Absolutely. Great advice. I want to thank Jon Gold for joining me again today, especially for sticking around for the 2 hours. And please do go and check out all of his work. Until then, I will be talking to you all very soon.
no rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio.
Simply Clean Foods is dedicated to providing the best quality food you can buy next to fresh from a farmer's market. Our stringent quality controls and absolute zero GMOs plus testing for heavy metals makes us unique in the storable foods market. Our line of fruits, vegetables, and meats are suitable for everyday use, and you won't have to worry about throwing away valuable groceries ever again. Take out the amount you need and reseal the package for use within the next 6 months. Simply Clean Foods' primary focus is to bring clean food to people all around the world and change the way we look at freeze-dried food in our daily cooking. Go to simplycleanfoods.net. That's www.simplycleanfoods.net today.
We all know that they're not telling us the truth. So stand up for your rights, demand the real medicine, and your right to use it and grow it. This is Rick Sensen, and you're listening to American Freedom Radio.
American Survival Wholesale is a proud sponsor of the American Freedom Radio. And when you purchase quality products from AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com, you help support this program. Our quality non-GMO foods do not contain MSG, high fructose corn syrup, or heavy metals. At American Survival Wholesale, you can choose from over 8,000 quality products, including self-defense weapons, bug-out bags, and long-term storable food at wholesale prices. We also have custom food packs available, including gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian packs. If we don't have it, you don't need it. American Survival Wholesale is a veteran-owned and operated company which also supports our veterans in need, and we are very active in disaster relief. If you would like to become a distributor, please email us at bugoutamerica@usa.com or call 818-720-0759. We offer free consultations to answer all your questions. Do it today while things are calm. That's AmericanSurvivalWholesale.com.
Assassination. You know what's interesting about assassination? Well, not only does it change those popularity polls in a big hurry, but it's also interesting to notice who it is we assassinate. You ever notice who it is? Stop to think of who it is we kill. It's always people who've told us to live together in harmony and try to love one another. Jesus, Gandhi, Lincoln, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, John Lennon. They all said, try to live together peacefully. Bam! Right in the head. Apparently we're not ready for that. Yeah, that's difficult behavior for us. We're too busy sitting around trying to think up ways to kill each other. Here's one we came up with. It's efficient, too. Genocide, you know? Killing large numbers of people simply because they don't look like you, they don't talk like you, and they don't have the same kind of hats you do. You ever notice that anytime you see two groups of people who really hate each other, chances are good they're wearing different kind of hats. Keep an eye on that. It might be important.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom, and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs, and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, right, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.